Have you ever stopped to wonder why some people simply cannot connect with certain ideas, no matter how hard you try to explain them? Why there are individuals who seem to live in a completely different reality from yours, as if inhabiting a world where deep reflection simply doesn't exist? Maybe you've noticed it in work meetings, family conversations, or even in intimate relationships. There's a strange feeling of speaking different languages, even when using the same words. It's like offering crystal clear water to someone who insists on drinking from a murky puddle, and you just can't understand why they won't accept your offer. This frustrating experience is neither coincidence nor bad luck. There is a deep logic behind it, one that reveals something fundamental about the nature of human consciousness and how different types of minds operate in the world. Today, we will explore 6 personality archetypes that represent ways of being so distant from reflective thinking and the pursuit of truth that even someone with the patience and wisdom of Yuval Harari would find it insurmountably difficult to form a genuine connection. This isn't about judging or condemning these people, but about understanding why certain forms of consciousness are fundamentally incompatible and what that teaches us about ourselves and the nature of human communication. The first person Harari would likely keep at a distance is what we might call the collector of absolute certainties. This is someone who has turned their inability to tolerate ambiguity into a psychological fortress. For them, the world is a place where all the important questions have already been answered, where every complex situation can be reduced to a simple formula, and where any challenge to these established truths is seen as a waste of time or even a threat. When faced with nuance, paradox, or the need to rethink their positions, this person doesn't feel curiosity or intellectual interest. Instead, they experience something close to existential panic. Their mind works like a defense system that automatically rejects any information that might shake their belief structures. They're not interested in exploring the complexities of the human condition because to them, that exploration poses a danger to their mental stability. It's as if their psyche built a conceptual bunker, and any attempt at ventilation or expansion is perceived as a hostile invasion. Harari, whose entire body of work is dedicated to questioning established narratives and exploring the inherent uncertainty of the human experience, would find in this person not a dialogue partner, but a wall. No matter how patiently he tried to present his ideas, they would be filtered, distorted, or simply ignored by this person's psychological defense system. The conversation would become an exercise in mutual frustration, where one is trying to open windows and the other is desperately trying to close them. The second type that would represent an insurmountable challenge is the intellectual performance narcissist. At first glance, this person might seem like the ideal conversation partner for someone like Harari. They show interest in complex topics, quote respected authors, participate in philosophical discussions, and project an image of intellectual depth. But there's a fundamental difference between genuinely being interested in knowledge and using knowledge as a tool for self-promotion. This individual doesn't engage with ideas to understand reality or ease human suffering. They engage with ideas because they want to be seen as someone who engages with ideas. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to demonstrate superiority. Every book read turns into an intellectual badge. Every insight becomes a weapon to establish social hierarchy. For this person, the value of an idea lies not in its ability to illuminate truth or promote well-being, but in its power to impress others and cement their image as a cultured and sophisticated individual. Harari would quickly realize he is dealing with someone who uses philosophy as intellectual makeup, not as a tool for transformation. Discussions would become ego games, where the goal isn't to collaboratively explore the world's complexity, but to win debates and showcase erudition. It's impossible to have a genuine conversation about humanity's big questions with someone who's more interested in how the conversation makes them look than in the content of the conversation itself. The irony is that this person may have read more books and memorized more concepts than many genuine thinkers, but their relationship with knowledge is fundamentally shallow and instrumental. The third problematic category is the extreme relativist who confuses intellectual sophistication with an inability to take any definitive stance on anything. This person has discovered that they can appear very wise simply by denying the possibility of objective knowledge or meaningful moral judgments. For them, any attempt to distinguish between truth and falsehood, or right and wrong, is evidence of intellectual naivety. When Harari speaks about the dangers of authoritarianism, they respond that authoritarianism is just a social construct. When he analyzes the implications of artificial intelligence, they argue that the very idea of implication is problematic because it presupposes causality, which is merely a way of organizing experience, not an objective reality. In their mind, the only intellectually defensible position is to never defend any position at all. They don't realize that their extreme relativism is in itself a dogmatic position, and that their refusal to make judgments is paradoxically a constant judgment on the impossibility of judgment. The result is an intellectual paralysis disguised as philosophical sophistication. Harari, who devotes his life to careful distinctions and evidence-based positions, would find in this person a conceptual void. There would be no common ground for discussion because one side denies the very possibility of common ground. It's like trying to build a bridge with someone who insists the concept of a bridge is a cultural illusion. The conversation would become a labyrinth of infinite deconstructions where every attempt to establish a starting point is immediately dissolved in questions about the nature of language, reality, and questioning itself. The fourth archetype that would generate fundamental incompatibility is the cynical pragmatist, someone who has reduced the entire complexity of human existence to calculations of immediate personal gain. For this person, questions about the meaning of life, the future of humanity, or the ethical implications of technology are intellectual luxuries for people with too much time on their hands. They live in a world where every action is measured solely by its ability to generate short-term, tangible, and measurable benefits. When Harari speaks about the need to rethink our institutions in light of technological transformation, this individual replies with questions about how that will improve their financial or professional situation. When he explores existential issues arising from AI advancements. They want to know whether to invest in tech stocks. It's not that this person can't understand abstract concepts. They've consciously chosen to discard any form of thinking that doesn't produce immediate practical results. Their mind operates like a calculator of advantages, and any input that doesn't fit that language is automatically discarded as irrelevant. Harari would quickly realize he is trying to discuss symphonies with someone who only hears the sound of cash registers. The tragedy is that this kind of mentality, taken to the extreme, contributes directly to the very problems Harari tries to analyze. Humanity's inability to think long-term, the reduction of all values to economic metrics, and the creation of systems that optimize parts without considering the whole. The fifth incompatible personality would be the emotional drama addict, someone who has turned emotional intensity into their only way of validating their existence. This person lives in a constant state of emotional turbulence, not because their life is objectively harder than others, but because they've learned to interpret every experience through the lens of personal drama. For them, an idea only has value if it can be directly connected to personal suffering or individual trauma. When Harari discusses broad social transformations affecting all humanity, they immediately redirect the conversation to how these changes relate specifically to their own emotional problems. If he talks about algorithms and big data, they want to talk about how violated they feel when they receive personalized ads. If he analyzes the crisis of liberal democracy, they want to connect it to their own sense of not being heard in personal relationships. It's not that their individual experiences are irrelevant. The problem is that they are unable to abstract from their particular experience to understand broader patterns or find meaning in anything that can't be immediately personalized and emotionalized. Their mind works like an emotional black hole that pulls every discussion into the gravitational center of their own personal dramas. Harari, who tries to maintain a panoramic perspective on human challenges, would find in this person a centripetal force that constantly pulls the conversation into an emotional specificity where broader analysis become impossible. The irony is that in their constant search for emotional validation, this person ends up being less able to process their emotions in a healthy way because they never develop conceptual tools to put them into perspective. The sixth and final type that would represent an insurmountable obstacle is the simplicity fundamentalist, someone who has turned the rejection of complexity into a moral virtue. This person sincerely believes that all of life's important questions have simple answers, and that any attempt to introduce nuance or consider multiple variables is an unnecessary complication. For them, life would be much better if everyone just followed a few basic principles, whether religious, ideological, or common sense. When Harari explores the geopolitical complexities of globalization, they respond that people just need to be honest and hardworking. When he analyzes the ethical dilemmas of biotechnology, they claim that natural is always better than artificial. When he discusses the paradoxes of modern democracy, they insist that democracy simply means letting the majority decide, This person can't comprehend that their thirst for simplicity is itself a form of psychological complexity. They don't realize that their refusal to consider nuance is a sophisticated choice that requires constant mental effort. Their mind works like a filter that reduces all complex information to pre-established and familiar categories. Harari would find himself trying to explain a prism to someone who insists that light is just white and all colors are illusions created by people who like to complicate things. The conversation would become a constant exercise in reduction, where each attempt to introduce a new analytical dimension is immediately compressed back into a simplistic format and thus incapable of capturing the reality of the phenomenon in question. Now, you might be wondering why it's important to recognize these types of personalities and what that teaches us about the nature of communication and human understanding. The answer is deeply revealing about ourselves and the limits of our ability to truly connect with others. These 6 archetypes represent modes of consciousness that are not simply different from the reflective and questioning mindset that characterizes thinkers like Harari. They are modes of consciousness specifically structured against the possibility of reflection and questioning. It's not that these people struggle to understand complex ideas. It's that they've developed psychological systems that protect them from the need to understand complex ideas. Each of them has found a way to avoid the existential discomfort that comes with an honest confrontation with uncertainty, ambiguity, and moral responsibility, all of which define the human condition. The certainty collector avoids this discomfort through rigid dogmatism. The performance narcissist avoids it by turning knowledge into personal spectacle. The extreme relativist avoids it by denying the possibility of any meaningful knowledge. The cynical pragmatist avoids it by reducing everything to calculations of advantage. The drama addict avoids it by personalizing everything. And the fundamentalist of simplicity avoids it by refusing to acknowledge complexity. There is an important lesson here about the limits of rational persuasion and the nature of mindset shifts. For most of human history, we've assumed that disagreements arise mainly from lack of information or communication failures. We believed that if we could explain our ideas clearly enough or present sufficiently compelling evidence, we could reach any reasonable person. But this assumption ignores the fact that not all disagreements are about the content of ideas. Some disagreements are about the very possibility of having certain kinds of ideas. Some people don't reject specific conclusions of reflective thinking because they found flaws in the logic or evidence. They reject the activity of reflective thinking itself because it threatens the structure they've chosen for their psychological experience. For these individuals, accepting the need to question their own beliefs or to consider multiple perspectives on complex issues or to tolerate uncertainty about fundamental matters would be like accepting the demolition of the mental architecture they've built to protect themselves from existential anxiety. It's not a matter of intelligence or access to education. It's a matter of existential choice about how to deal with the fundamentally uncertain and ambiguous nature of human existence. This brings us to a more nuanced understanding of why certain conversations are impossible no matter how much goodwill is involved. When a thinker like Harari tries to discuss the implications of the biotech revolution with a fundamentalist of simplicity, it's not just a misunderstanding about data or concepts. It's a clash between two radically different ways of organizing consciousness. One form embraces uncertainty as an inevitable and potentially fruitful feature of human experience. The other treats uncertainty as a problem to be eliminated through adherence to simple and immutable principles. One sees complexity as a reflection of the richness of reality. The other sees complexity as an unnecessary obstacle to peace of mind. These are not differences that can be resolved through better arguments or clearer explanations. They reflect fundamental choices about how to live a conscious human life. I need to pause for a moment and ask you something directly. Do you recognize any of these patterns in people around you? Maybe even in aspects of yourself? I know it can be uncomfortable to admit that we carry some of these tendencies within ourselves. Many of us oscillate between different ways of coping with the world's complexity, sometimes seeking absolute certainties when uncertainty becomes unbearable, sometimes dramatizing our experience when we feel unheard. If you recognized any of these patterns in your own life, share in the comments. I recognize in myself the tendency to. Your honesty could help others realize that we all struggle at different times with the temptation to avoid life's complexity through mental strategies that in the long run limit us more than protect us. Sometimes naming these tendencies is the first step in developing healthier ways of dealing with the inherent uncertainty of the human experience. Understanding these incompatibilities also reveals something crucial about the nature of intellectual community and why certain ideas can only flourish in specific social environments. Harari can generate deep insights about the human condition not only because he is individually talented, but because he is embedded in networks of people who share a basic commitment to honest inquiry, to tolerating ambiguity, and to being willing to question their own premises. Without this social foundation, even the brightest minds struggle to develop and communicate complex ideas. That's why historical periods of major intellectual advancement often coincide with the emergence of communities of thinkers who manage to create protected environments where certain forms of consciousness can develop without constant interference from incompatible mentalities. This isn't about elitism or arbitrary exclusion. It's about recognizing that certain mental activities, like certain physical ones, require specific conditions to occur. You can't practice deep meditation in a place where people are constantly trying to sell you things. Likewise, you can't develop sophisticated philosophical analysis in an environment where people constantly reduce every discussion to political slogans or personal gain. This doesn't mean we should isolate ourselves completely from people who think differently or give up trying to communicate important ideas to broader audiences. It means we need to be more strategic about when and how we attempt those communications, and more realistic about what we can hope to achieve in different contexts. Harari manages to write books that reach millions of people precisely because he doesn't try to accommodate all mentalities at once in his writing. He writes for people who are at least somewhat willing to question established narratives and consider uncomfortable perspectives about the human future. That doesn't make him less democratic or compassionate. It makes him more effective at communicating meaningful ideas to people who are in a position to process them productively. The alternative would be to dilute his ideas to the point where they lose any transformative power, all in an attempt to make them palatable to mindsets fundamentally incompatible with the kind of questioning his ideas demand. There is also an important temporal dimension to this discussion. The 6 personalities we've described are not necessarily permanent states of consciousness. Many people go through different phases in life, sometimes embracing complexity, sometimes retreating into simplicity, sometimes seeking emotional drama, sometimes hiding behind convenient relativism. The incompatibility we're describing is not a lifelong condemnation of certain individuals, but a description of mental states that make certain types of communication temporarily impossible. This means our strategy shouldn't simply be to avoid people who show these traits, but to recognize when they are operating in these modes and adjust our expectations accordingly. It also means we must remain vigilant about our own tendencies to fall into these defensive strategies when we are confronted with ideas that challenge our psychological comfort zone. The difference between a mature thinker and someone trapped in one of these defensive mindsets isn't the absence of temptation to avoid complexity. It's the ability to recognize those temptations and consciously choose to resist them in most situations. Perhaps the most important lesson here is about the nature of intellectual responsibility in an era where we have access to more information than any previous generation, but also face unprecedented pressure to simplify, polarize, and personalize every issue. Each of us makes daily choices about how to respond to this overload of complexity. We can choose the path of patient inquiry and tolerance for uncertainty, even when it's psychologically uncomfortable. Or we can choose one of the many avoidance strategies our culture readily offers: dogmatism, intellectual narcissism, extreme relativism, pragmatic cynicism, emotional drama, or the fundamentalism of simplicity. These aren't one-time decisions. They are recurring choices in every important conversation, in every encounter with information that challenges our assumptions, in every opportunity to examine our own motivations and limitations honestly. The relevance of these reflections becomes even clearer when we think about the specific challenges our civilization currently faces. Issues like climate change, global inequality, technological revolution, and the erosion of democratic institutions require exactly the kind of collaborative, nuanced, long-term thinking that the 6 personalities we described make impossible. We cannot solve complex problems with simplistic solutions. We cannot build international cooperation through national narcissism. We cannot navigate dangerous technological transitions through moral relativism. We cannot create sustainable policies while focusing only on short-term gains. We cannot face existential threats through emotional dramatization. And we cannot deal with complex systems by insisting they are simple. The incompatibility between certain forms of consciousness and the need for collective wisdom is not just an academic issue about interpersonal communication. It's one of the main obstacles to the survival and flourishing of human civilization. This brings us back to the original question of why even someone with Harari's patience and communication skills would find these 6 personalities insurmountable. The answer doesn't lie in any personal flaw in those people, nor in any inherent superiority of thinkers like Harari. The answer lies in the fact that there are ways of organizing human consciousness that are structurally incompatible with one another, and that some of these ways are better suited than others to dealing with the kinds of challenges our species currently faces. Recognizing this reality is not a reason for despair or for giving up on communication efforts. It's a reason for greater clarity about when and how to invest our communicative energy, and for greater compassion toward people who have chosen different strategies for dealing with the existential anxiety we all share. If these reflections touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps couldn't find the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, it is a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. And if this video helped you better understand why certain conversations are impossible, and perhaps also why that is not necessarily a tragedy, leave a like so more people can find these reflections. See you in the next exploration of human consciousness and its fascinating paradoxes. One of the things I liked about Buddhism is that belief, to some extent, is of course important. If you don't believe that going to a meditation retreat will help you in some way, you won't go there. But the belief in itself doesn't do anything for you. It's your ability to actually observe the reality without reaction, without judgment, to just see things as they are. This is what liberates. The thing is that not in a dictatorship, in a democracy, newspapers and other news outlets are liable for their decisions. Like if the editor of the New York Times decides to publish some conspiracy theory or fake news at the front page of the New York Times, he cannot hide or she cannot hide behind the argument, but free speech, there are some people who believe it's true, so I put it on the front page of the New York Times. No, your job as editor is not just to put something random there or something that would please people. Your job is to fact check and to take responsibility for these decisions and to make sure that if you publish something on the front page of the New York Times, you better be sure that this is accurate and this is responsible. And if you don't know how to do it, then you're in the wrong job. There is this naive expectation that if a network spreads bad information, fake news, conspiracy theories, it will destroy itself. And this is not the case. Some of the most powerful networks in history were completely delusional, and still they were immensely powerful. Because power in history, in human societies, it can mean different things. It can be the technical power to manipulate external reality, and for instance, to create an atom bomb. To create an atom bomb, you need to know physics. If you spread lies and fictions about physics, you will not be able to build a bomb. But power in human networks also depends on the ability
to get a lot of people to agree on something and cooperate on something. If you want to build an atom bomb and you just know physics, you will not succeed. You need millions of people to help you. You need people to mine uranium and to build nuclear reactors and to grow wheat and potatoes, so all the miners and the physicists will have something to eat. How do you get millions of people to cooperate? In history, it's often done with fictions, with stories, and a story doesn't need to be true in order to succeed in uniting people. To build a bomb, you need to know the truth about physics or the bomb won't explode. But a powerful story can explode even if it's based on fictions and fantasies.